So today I am joined by someone who I've always looked up to as a singer and always loved to hear from and chat to about all things to do with the voice. Gemma Hinchliffe graduated from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in 2005, where she studied voice with Jessica Glynn and Annette Thompson. She then went on to further study at Trinity College of Music in London on the Early Music postgraduate programme. And while studying, Gemma formed a classical trio with two of her peers from the Guildhall. And together, the three young singers signed a development contract with Decca, part of Universal Music, which saw them tour the UK with the quartet G4 from X Factor, I believe, and perform with artists including Alfie Boe, write with key producers, and travel to Nashville, USA to write and record music with some celebrated songwriters. Sounds really amazing. So whilst working as a freelance singer, Gemma decided to move into a different area of the music industry and gained employment working for Warner Classics as a product manager. Here she worked on major classical releases, including those by Jose Carreras, Daniel Barenboim, and other major classical recording artists. In 2013, Gemma joined the International Staff Songsters and was privileged to be part of this group for a number of years and serve in this ministry. Gemma has recently released a CD with World of Sound entitled Thankful, and that features Phil Cobb, Richard Phillips, and Boscombe Salvation Army Band. And she's also joined by her sister on one of the tracks, which is really cool. Gemma now lives in Dorset with her husband and two beautiful boys and enjoys a career in teaching. Currently, Gemma and her family attend Boscombe Salvation Army. So thank you so much for joining me today, Gemma. Really appreciate you accepting the invitation.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here. Lovely to chat to you. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Let's jump straight in. So we know that singing is an integral part of our praise and worship. The Bible is full to bursting with passages telling us to sing our praise to God. What importance do you place on sung worship in the church?
So for me, sung worship within the church is just incredibly important. Of course, prayer and Bible study and the sermon as part of the service and other expressions of worship all play a really important part. And I wouldn't want to emphasize just singing over any of those because they're all so important. But for me personally, either listening to or being part of sung worship speaks to my heart, my mind and my soul. And it's also the sort of expression that I feel I can most give back in praise and worship to God. And I'm always drawn to Psalm 104, verse 33. I will sing to the Lord all my life. I will sing praise to my God as long as I live. And that's something that is just so important to me. I think during the pandemic, our lives have been changed in so many ways. People all over the world have had to deal with so many difficult and sad situations. And at this time, I've often turned to music and singing, as I imagine a lot of people have. We haven't been able to do it in person, we've been able to do it at home, but not collectively. But in listening and singing during these times, it's really reminded me of the blessing and importance of this ministry. I've often reminded of that. I've seen it on Facebook a few times where it says, you know, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And I think we never know what people are dealing with, especially over the last year. But I know that music for me has been particularly important. And moving forward, I really hope and look forward to the day where we can be all singing together, worshipping and praising God. So hopefully soon.
So a really important aspect of singing is learning and training and ongoing training and development. Would you share with us about your education and what kind of impact that's had on your development and ministry as a singer?
Yes. I come from a particularly musical family. So my mum went to the Royal College. She was a singer. My nana her mum went to the Guildhall as a singer. Her dad was in the National Youth Orchestra, really young. He's about 12. He's one of the youngest percussionists I think they've had. So my dad, you know, both sides of my family. My sister also came to Guildhall with me for 2 years. So I kind of growing up in a very musical family, both outside the army and within the army, it was kind of a little bit like expected almost, like, what are you going to sing or play? All my cousins did something, or they were actors. One of my cousins was an actor, went to study at the Welsh. So we kind of didn't have many options. It was just, that was what happened. We were all singing or dancing, whatever. So I sang, I've got very, very young memories of singing at about 4 or 5 in sort of singing like festivals, local festivals, or the Bath Festival. I used to go and sing. My mum used to take me up there and sing. So it kind of just was something I did. I loved it. I loved singing, but it was just something I did. I just would get up and sing. That was it. And so obviously having a music teacher as a mum as well, I did all my, you know, my normal grades. I played the flute, played the piano badly. It wasn't really my thing. But, you know, I sort of went through all my, you know, associated board and A levels and all that sort of thing. And I kind of always expected to go to music college. I don't know why, because it's pretty tough to get into, but I just wanted to go. That's what I always wanted to do. I think I just loved singing, and I wanted to really have that sort of grounded knowledge, because I don't know particularly if I had a very good vocal technique. I don't think it was a bad vocal technique before I went to college, but I think probably at the age of about 14, 15, my mum said to me, I can't teach you anymore. It's very difficult teaching your own children. I think she said, right, we'll get you a teacher. So I had a wonderful teacher who used to take the Bournemouth Choral Society, it was a choral society that attached to the Bournemouth Orchestra. And he was wonderful, amazing guy. I mean, he was a repetiteur, so he was a wonderful accompanist. I don't think he taught me about singing though. I just had loads of repertoire. So when I got to college, I was really prepared in terms of repertoire, but I think I was confused in terms of vocal technique. So really getting to college was where I grounded my knowledge of singing. So I auditioned. As you probably know, Karl, you kind of do the rounds and do all the auditions. I wanted to go to the Royal College because that's where my mum had gone, and I loved the building, and it was next to the Albert Hall. I thought, that's where I want to go. Until I walked into the Guildhall. I don't know if you've ever been to the Guildhall, Karl, I'm sure you have. It's part of the Barbican. It's a funny old 1950s building or something. Apparently it's built on it's a burial site, so there's all these sorts of funny stories about it, but I loved it, the fact that I love the architecture of the Barbican, but I love the fact there were actors there, stage managers, the jazz department was amazing, and you sort of walk in and you're just, it's crazy place to be. They kind of call it the Bohemian College, and it was just, for me, that was the place. And I knew as soon as I walked in, that's where I wanted to go. So that's the Surrey College, I want to go there. Luckily, I got a place there, so that worked out all right. So you kind of audition. I don't know how many people they audition, but I think it's in the hundreds, because obviously it's an international college. So I think when I started, there was probably around 20-ish in our year of singers, but you've got to think that's basses, tenors, countertenors, contraltos, mezzo, top, you know, sopranos. So there was probably 4 or 5 sopranos, perhaps, something like that. So it's tough to get in. So I was very thankful when I got my place there. And I did my 4-year undergraduate. Then I went to Trinity to do a year on the early music course, which is a bit of a funny one. People go, oh, early music. But it was because I felt that I needed to find a niche. When singers are developing, I remember singing, I think it was our deputy head of vocal studies, Linny Robertson, said to us, I think it was probably in year 2, she said, you're basically embryos in year 2. We thought we knew everything in year 2. She said, you're embryos, your voices are maturing all the time, and you're not going to get to that point until you're in your 30s or so. So you've got to find something to do. Another teacher once told us on a masterclass that singers have to have active patience, which is another really vital piece, nugget of information. I remember just combing in on thinking, I'm taking that with me, because you can prepare, you can get your technique, but your voice is always maturing. So that was really important. So it's sort of like you're doing lots of stuff, but you've still got that waiting game a little bit. So I went on the early music course because I didn't have one of those big Wagner, Puccini type voices soprano. I wasn't a dramatic soprano. I was kind of a Mozart soprano, really light. And so I thought, I used to do quite a lot of early music anyway. My teacher, Jessica Glynn, had taught Emma Kirkby. I don't know if you might know Emma Kirkby. She's a she's famous. She's got this beautiful, clear voice. And I've always been in love with Emma Kirkby. I think my voice has got far more vibrato, but when I was younger, it was a little lot like that. So she was my kind of idol. I loved her. And so my teacher, Jessica, taught Emma Kirkby. And so I think she probably saw in my voice a little bit of that. So she would steer me in terms of repertoire. I do a lot of Vivaldi and things like that, or songs with Luke Dowland, songs like that. So I think I went to the Trinity really on the early music course to give me that year of a bit of time to prepare my voice, but also to sort of make a bit of a niche for myself in that world. And so that was sort of my studying. But again, you're always learning. I'm always learning about singing now. I think as an adult, you're always on that journey. And I can hear a singer and think, gosh, I want to know how she's done that, or how she spun that top note like that. I need to do that. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so nothing's ever perfect for me. So I'm always constantly thinking, oh, I need that top note needs to be better, or I need to look at my chest voice or my breath control. Probably now after the coronavirus is not very good. So I'm always thinking about improving. So although I finished at my postgraduate there at the Trinity, I have learnt so much since leaving college as well. So that's my education. So I probably chatted quite a lot doing that.
No, that's really interesting, and I can relate. Going to music college myself, and that doing the rounds of all the auditions and having to put yourself through all those long journeys to London, and if you've had a rubbish audition, you've got that long journey back home.
Oh,
and,
yes.
But also just the idea that when I first went to music college, you're a bit arrogant, a bit cocky,
yes.
a bit self-confident,
yes,
and that soon kind of knocked out of you. And
very much.
I think getting into music college is the easiest bit in a way, and then then the hard work starts. My first term, I didn't play a single piece of music. My piano teacher I was just doing scales and technique stuff for the whole term, and I was like, but it helped, and
that exactly the same thing happened to me. I literally, my first term at Guildhall, my teacher said, right, for the next term you're going to sing on vowels alone, and she made me sing on vowels for the whole term, because I'd got there thinking I need to spit my diction out, which is what we always talk about, don't we, especially in the army. You must make sure that the person right at the back hears every word, and that is important. But what I was doing was breaking up my legato line, so I was spitting it all out like that, and then my legato line had gone. She was like, no, we're not having any of that. So it was an amazing lesson for me. It really was. And after the term, I was there, I think, sort of.
So we'll move on, still with kind of the education aspect. Did you come across any vocal issues when you were training, either for yourself or for your peers? Anything that came up a lot?
I've never had a problem like that with my voice. I am quite protective of my voice. It's funny, actually, because obviously being at college, you meet friends. So you've got singer friends, but you've got jazz friends or brass friends, or and they'd always laugh at the singers, because they'd always say, we know you're a singer coming through the reception, because that's sort of the main foyer in Guildhall, because you've always got a scarf around your neck. That was like the typical, singer, here we go, scarf around the neck. Pianists always generally had gloves on or something like that. I don't know if Karl, you had gloves. I had a friend that was a pianist from Spain, and she was always wearing gloves because she was so cold. So these are funny things, isn't there? But I didn't. I was very cautious. Every year we'd have, and I always forget how to, I'm always worried I say this name, this title incorrectly, but a laryngologist every year. He was a guy from Harley Street, and he would come and give us a lecture on vocal hygiene at the start of every year, and he'd say, don't drink orange juice before bed, and we'd have all these things that we shouldn't do. But I've always been quite careful. I also think I've got quite a strong voice. I know I sing in the right way. I think that's sometimes where people have issues if they're not singing with a good solid technique. So if they're not supporting their voice, they can be singing on their voice. You know, you see that a lot on those programs like X Factor. All of a sudden, people that haven't had that many singing lessons are thrown into this program where they're singing every day, all the time, and their voice is just not prepared, doesn't have the stamina for it. So yeah, I think in terms of vocal hygiene, I've always been quite careful. If anything doesn't feel right, I always tell my people just stop. It shouldn't hurt. Sometimes you should feel not tired, but like you've done exercise. So, you know, if you've been to the gym, you should feel like you've done a workout, but it shouldn't be tired or breathy or uncomfortable, you know, or hurt. That shouldn't be the case. So if it's like that, stop, you know, lots of water, lots of sleep. Music camp doesn't help for that because it's probably all the stuff they don't do really. And lots of late nights and their poor voices at the end of the week. But all that sort of stuff. So I have been lucky, but I know that it can be very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you've touched upon the next question that I was going to ask, talking about how you look after your voice,
Yeah.
especially when you're doing solo work and you have those pressures. Yeah, so if there's anything you want to add to that, but feel free to.
I've gone off my notes here, Karl, you know. This is dangerous territory. I mean, no, I think I've probably covered that. I think, you know, when you are solo singing, it is really important to rest, you know, not like we do sometimes at camps and things like that, but go to bed early. I'm a bit of a night owl, but I have to force myself. Sometimes when you're performing, you get adrenaline, so you're a bit nervous. You know, you need that adrenaline. It's something, that's another big thing about college, is learning to use nerves and adrenaline, and performance psychology is something I'm really into. And that's a difficult thing. And I had to really overcome that at college. But I think sleep, good, healthy, you know, as we would look after our body, as, you know, we're supposed to, good, healthy food and diet, you know, not too much chocolate. You know, I wouldn't ever have chocolate before it. So say if I'm singing on a Saturday night, I wouldn't ever have chocolate. I've got a really weird thing, and sometimes singers, well, I think performers, musicians, actors have these weird things. I try not to have too many little quirky things that I do before I sing, because I think you can get stuck on them. But I always have room temperature water. So if somebody gives me a bottle of water, I'll keep it in my mouth for a bit. This sounds really strange, but I find if I drink cold water from a fridge, my larynx kind of goes like that. So I always have to have it. It's very bizarre, but it's a thing. I've got a thing about it. I mean, the other thing I've always steered away from is anything like strepsils, vocal zones. That could be quite controversial because I know a lot of singers have those, but I've just anything like, even stuff like bark, you know, like Rescue Remedy. I've known a lot of friends, singers who have got with nerves have taken Rescue Remedy, especially at college towards the end. You sort of find with such a big thing. It's like 60% of it's a huge stress and pressure. And I know that I always thought if I get into that, if I was to sing well on it, then I'd think I have to take it all the time because I've sung well because of that. So I've always tried not to. I find with things like strepsils, they just dry your throat out. So they'd always say at college, don't do that. Don't have those sort of things. I get the mental thing of vocal zones, but I think it's better to just steam. If I've got a bit of a cold and I'm singing the next night, I'll steam. That's I think just keep it healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, and I think strepsils and like throat lozenges are, as you say, they're a bit of a controversial topic.
Yeah.
But recently I've read into a lot of it because it's just something about it that didn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
This kind of reliance on a sweet that you eat before you sing, because without that you wouldn't, you know, be at your full potential. But actually, if you're relying on lozenges and vocal zone and whatnot, there's probably an underlying issue there that you need to get checked out, or that you need to change your approach. I think that water, steaming are probably the best things that you can probably do.
I mean, you could put like a bit of Olbersoil in or something like it into the water, but sometimes I just literally just steam, you know, with a towel. But lots of my friends, that's what they do. If you ask a singer, they go about. I mean, some people have some funny things, but I just think water, early night, steam, and sometimes you just have to admit if you're ill, you're ill. I know if it's professional work, that's difficult because you're thinking about money. They've paid you to do a job, that's difficult. But what you've also got to remember is, people say you're only as good as your last performance. So if you don't sing very well, because it's a real balancing act, and I think you get that's experience as well, and sort of catching it early. If you can just get to bed early, keep it healthy.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's really great. So we'll touch upon I want to touch upon the difference between the approach to solo work and ensemble work. And obviously you're in the ISS for a number of years, and you sung a part of the trio, and obviously part of Core Songsters and so many other groups probably. But also kind of balancing that with your solo work. Is there a noticeable difference in how you approach singing in a choir as opposed to singing solos?
So I think, so in terms of vocal technique, it should be the same. So, you should be warming up before a rehearsal or a performance. So anything I do in terms of when I sing, I would do the same. And I've got like this little set bit of exercise. I suppose that's a bit of my OCD. I've got exercise I know work and know get my voice to that point where I am really warmed up, I can feel it. So that would be the same. But in terms of my actual delivery or performance, then you're not a soloist within a group, you're part of that ensemble, so you need to blend. There's no good having a voice. I think sometimes what I've struggled with, and I think this is probably when I was younger, because I had quite a big voice for a young person, if that made sense, and I'd always think, oh, I'm too loud, and I'd want to try and make it smaller. And in doing that, I then put a lot of tension on my voice because I kind of went, I've got to make it smaller. I kind of just learned that I needed better support, basically. If your support's there, you can sing so quietly. It shouldn't be on your voice anyway. But in terms of, you aren't a soloist, you're part of that group, you need to be listening. So, let's say in ISS, where I was standing, I'd be listening either side of me. If whoever was standing next to me was taking a breath, I wasn't going to be taking a breath then. Things like that. You're always tuning in to the parts around you. So I was actually next to Juliet, who was second soprano, and then Rachel was soprano latterly. So I was sort of making sure I was really banging that centering of that note. But in terms of my technique, I was using exactly the same technique. It was just how I delivered it, I suppose. You don't want to hear just my voice in a group. I think with our trio, again, that was unusual because our three voices, I was really classical, probably. We did classical crossover, although when we recorded, we did different. So we did some Mozart, we did some classical crossover. We even did a pop song with crossover, which is quite an interesting thing to hear. But when they were developing what we might sound like, we tried all these different things. Although we were all in the same year and we're all classical and all sopranos, we did have quite different voices. So I was probably the one that was more early music. Rachel she was a soprano, but we were both actually quite rich sopranos. So I unusually can go quite low for a soprano. I mean, sopranos generally, when you think of a classical soprano, you think of the role Susanna. So you're kind of thinking of A, below, middle C. But I can sort of get a G sometimes. But for some sopranos, that's very low for them. That would be very, very low. So we're quite low. Shelley, she had been in a pop group before she came to Guildhall, so she did all the real pop stuff. So it was quite interesting, but we all seemed to our voices worked together, which is probably why we got the deal, because we did sound, we just sort of fitted. We were our individual voices, but when we were singing, a little bit like you do with For Him, you can hear your voices within the group, but you're blending when you're together. So there were times when I was a bit of a soloist, if I was doing the obligato, or if I was doing the verse one or whatever, but actually together we were that trio, and we were always, it was almost like we were one person, especially when we were singing a lot, when we were on tour and things. we almost felt, you know, we knew everyone's part. We were sort of almost one person. We were living out of suitcases, and, you know, we traveled to Nashville together. So we were sort of like sisters, really. We knew it. So I think in answer to that, it shouldn't really be different. But in terms of how you deliver it, should be, you know, you shouldn't be the one. You shouldn't stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, no, that's a good, a good evaluation of that, definitely. So we are going to spend some time now just looking at a piece of music from the Sing to the Lord's journals. This is I Have Seen the Glory of the Lord, a firm favourite amongst many people, written by Chris Brindley, a really, really gifted songwriter based in Australia, and absolutely lovely guy as well. But yeah, so Gemma is now just going to talk through this with us, and we're just going to be chatting about any vocal tips and ways of getting around any challenging moments. So over to you, Gemma. Thank you.
Great. And I totally agree. Isn't it such a beautiful song? I first heard this, the ISS went to Australia, and I remember just singing it. And you know, when you have that sort of out of body experience where you can hear the song echoing around, you know, especially at Birmingham Symphony Hall, just like, what a song, you know. And I think particularly, I think we've touched on it before, what's so important now, thinking about not just vocal technique, but the gift of song in the Salvation Army, the gift of melody and words married together, worshipping, praising God. That's just so special. And I think this is one of the songs, and there's many songs, you know, we're so lucky in the songs we have at our disposal and for worship, that, you know, I could have picked loads, but this song is particularly important to me. I love the words. I've seen the glory of the Lord, and what a title. And that's what we all want to see, isn't it? So I think probably I'm going to just start from the beginning. And I think what I want to remind everybody, and I remember probably my first singing company leader, which was my mum, tell me this: when the piano starts, that's the start of the song. The introduction is the start of the song. And as you know, singing companies, and she'd be pulling the faces back and making sure you're all looking in the right direction. And that is the start of the song. Now, as a singer at college, before college actually, to be honest, I always would be able to, in my head, hum along to the introduction. You should know that introduction. You should really be living it. That's the start of the song. That's setting us up, but it's important. I think where this song can fall slightly skew-iffy is the opening phrase. And I've heard it quite a few times happen in different recordings I've heard. We've got a rest right at the beginning. And I think what can happen is we can kind of slightly not anticipate it quick enough and come in late. I don't know, Karl, if maybe when you've sung this song, you've noticed it. You know, it seems to trickle in a little bit. And that can be a bit of a problem then with our breathing, because we need to be setting up our breath before. We don't want to be going, you know, we don't want a breath of wind, you know, we want to, because when we do that, when that happens, I just did it then, shoulders are going up. We don't want that. We've taken a really shallow breath. It's all up here. We feel a bit suffocated. We're not using our support. We're stuck up there. And I think then what can happen when we take that sort of breath is our voice can get a bit all over the place. Ooh, it's going all over. It's a bit breathy. It's a bit pitchy. So we need to be taking a very good breath at the beginning. And when I mean that, I mean it's going down. It's a big, deep breath. My singing teacher would get me to rub with my knuckles my rib cage at the front and at the back before I sang. Do it now. And it was to remind me that's my rib cage, and that needs to be coming out. I need to be really facilitating all this space. I've got so much resources here. I've got my diaphragm. We also always talk about a diaphragm. It's important, but it's not the only muscle we've got. We've got our stomach muscles. We've got muscles around our lungs, our rib cage, round the back. We've got muscles all up here. We've got our pelvic floor muscles. It's vitally important, especially singing up high. So, you know, we've got to be really engaging and taking a really deep breath. So going back to the song, we need to be taking that lovely deep breath. That's going to set up that first phrase, and what a first phrase it is. So the words are a breath of wind, a burning flame. Now, if we look at our dynamics, we tend to naturally sing this quite quietly, I think. So we need to just be thinking of that. The next little bit comes in the second bar, and I'm not going to do it bar by bar, Karl, so don't worry. But on that word flame, I think it can go flat. So I think it can go a breath of wind, a burning flame. It needs to be a bright sound. I think sometimes I hear lots of singers, burning flame. If your mouth like that, if it's not open, that's the sound. You can see by somebody's mouth before if I couldn't hear, I could hear the voice that I was listening to without listening to them by looking at their mouth shape. Okay, flame. It's got to be all up here. It's bright. If we're just flame, if there's no energy, then that's going to be the sound we get. What we put in, we get out, if that makes sense. So we've got to be thinking about that. And it's a minim, so it's a longer note, and that can dip a little bit in intonation. So as you going along every single sort of the verse of this song, concentrate on the end. So flame, name, it's bright, think bright. Now we don't want to go sharp, so you've got to be careful. But that's something a little area, I think, to just remember.
And I think kind of related to what you're saying here, this song is a perfect example of when we can, as a singer, you can really use the piano as a tool to just help you. Here at the piano part, you have this lovely kind of semi-quaver movement, which I think is replicating this breath of wind and the mighty wind in the next verse. But you can really use that as momentum and almost like a springboard to really enter into the vocal line
that sort of
keep that
pull
alive.
And push, hasn't it? And I think that's the other thing that's important, is to really know. I mean, as a soloist, I know the accompaniment, I know what's happening, I know the interludes when I'm not singing. I understand how that relates to what I've just sung and what I'm about to sing, and that's really important to know that. And you're absolutely right. I've notated my music. You've said it, Karl. That exactly. It's fine. It's perfect. That's why I just love this song. It's very descriptive. It's a little bit like I used to love English art song, and it reminds me of that, because Chris has captured perfectly, hasn't he? Just like you said, Karl, that wind in the right hand of the piano, and that is driving us forward. I have heard some core songs to sing this song, and we can love to sing it. And we can, as singers, we can wallow. I know I'm a wallower, and I have to be really careful. I have to make sure I'm slightly ahead of the beat in my mind, because otherwise, always be thinking a bar or two ahead or a phrase ahead. When you're looking at the music, sometimes you notice, especially with children, youth choirs, they're be thinking, where am I going? Where am I getting to? That's really important. And I think you're right. The accompaniment in this is really helping us drive that through and keeping us moving forward. And that's then mirrored in the words, isn't it? So I think perfectly right. So when it gets to then, so we've done the verse. I think there was one bit, we're on page, so we're kind of bar 13. So we've sung, with a holy fear I come before your throne and I wait. That weight needs to be placed sometimes. It's not particularly high for a soprano, it's a C. But it's opening out, the melody's sort of opening it out, and we just need to place that right on. And then we get to the chorus, and it feels like, I have seen, the glory of the Lord. Those words there, it's just so beautiful. It's got to be placed right on that note again, like we were talking about. The second phrase, and in his presence. So that's quite interesting, because you've got another rest there. And I did a bit of scooping, so I shouldn't have done that. That little rest there, I think sometimes with music and composition, silence is important. We forget, we don't always have to sing. So having that rest is actually more important to that phrase. And in his presence, it's that anticipation of his presence, isn't it? In that one rest. So, and in his presence. So it's kind of colouring the words there. We've got our vocal technique. We know the notes. We're colouring it. And then moving on. God eternal. I love the fact that starts on the first beat of the bar. God eternal in this time draws near. Got to watch the word time as well, because it's opening out time. So sometimes with notes like that, using the consonant quickly and getting back to the vowel is really important. So time. So it's sort of, we're not sticking it anywhere. We were saying this in the little gap. You've got to, this is where you're aiming for, really back there, because not in your nose, there, you're resonating here, you're using all these cavities, but you're here. And so something that with that in that time draw near.
Another kind of another piece of imagery that I like to use a lot is this idea. A lot of the time, if we're in a practice, I'll get everyone to stop singing the consonants and we'll just sing all the vowels. And it takes a bit of concentration to kind of but what that helps do is, in my mind anyway, I imagine the vowels are just like this long piece of thread, and the consonants, you're just kind of like threading them through, threading the vowels through the consonants. It's a bit wacky, but it really helps with this image of this line and this not letting the consonants break up the legato kind of
having that legato line. I think we were talking probably in the break again. We kind of said that I spent the first term at college just singing on vowels. My teacher tried to ditch them because I remember a song I used to sing. It's Edward Elgar's "Down the Dusty Road," the Shepherd song, I think it's called. It goes down the dusty road together, and it's very wordy, very English art song. And I was spitting out all the words, and I was just losing my legato line. She said, right, scrap it. We need to get back to that basic now.
I have seen the glory of the Lord, and in his presence my heart is stirred. God eternal in this time draws near, the King of heaven is here.
And obviously, it's such a great chorus. And it's very simple, actually, but it's so beautiful. Beautiful melody, piano underneath, the accompaniment. I think the words kind of sing it as well. I think that's what makes it for me in the chorus particularly. And then we've obviously repeated. So we've done our verse 2, we've gone through to the chorus, we've gone to our second time bar. And then we're growing, aren't we? We're getting to, we've got double forte, we've got crescendo in the accompaniment before we come in to verse 3, and we're very chordal at this point. So this is a type of ensemble choral singing that we need to really think about. Now, I always know that my ear as a soprano goes to the top first. I'm really sorry, bassist. I'm sorry, Karl. You're a baritone, aren't you? I'm really sorry, but I do gravitate towards the top. We need to have a good foundation. So we really need to get our basses there. That is, if you listen to a brass band, those tubas, it's got to be like an organ sound. So we really need to get that foundation to really make sure our intonation is there as well. At the top, we need to have a great foundation.
With lightning, thunder, shouts, and cries, and the million angels covering the skies, creation lifts its voice in praise, singing, holy is the Lord, holy is the Lord, holy is the Lord on high. I have seen the Lord.
It's thinking about really being, really doing our 4-part singing there. We've got to go back to our Bach chorales, our 4 parts. We've got to think about how we're how we're marrying together, how we're singing together. That's really important. You know, how those altos are fitting in, how the soprano are over the top. And we've got to think about that, and think about our intonation as well. And kind of moving through, again, things like, this is very wordy, this third verse, because it's changing emotion, isn't it? With lightning, thunder, shouts and cries. We want to hear those words, but again, we don't want to break up our line. So we've got to be mindful of that. Tip of the tongue, I always think, you know, with lightning, you know, you've got to use that tongue. Isn't it one of the biggest muscles in our body or something, our tongue? So, you know, it kind of, it's very important that we're right there. And then it's not really affecting anything else we're doing. You know, make sure we're really, our jaw, I mean, I do a sort of jaw exercise where you kind of, there's a little gap there in the middle of your jaw and it has to go backwards, and you do, yawning is amazing for warming up as well. It's lifting that soft palate. Don't stick your jaw out. You know, there should be like a bit of a string. It's sort of just very natural. And I sort of just very, if it hurts, don't do it if it hurts, very gentle. And just do some yawning and really kind of release, getting in there. So I think that's important as we're opening out and as we're getting higher, because this is really this third verse is really leading on to the next little stage, which is kind of moving us then to the key change. And I think, I don't know, Karl, if you would agree with me. I think you will, because I'm not actually sure if dynamically the dynamic markings are there. But how I do this song is where we've got a repeated holy is the Lord, holy is the Lord, holy is the Lord our God. You know, and that's a singer's dream, isn't it? Those couple of phrases, you know, we all want to go for it at that point. We've got to do something with that, though, haven't we? We can't just sing holy is the Lord the same 3 times. You know, if a phrase is repeated, I can't remember who told me, it might have been my flute teacher actually. If you've got a repeated phrase, you've got to do something with it. So we've got to grow. Holy is the Lord, holy is the Lord, holy is the Lord our God. And we're climaxing to that key change. And you know, you can feel the anticipation of that key change, can't you, coming in that repeated phrase. It's there for us to do. You know, Chris has written it so beautifully that we can't not do anything with it. And I've often heard that sort of sung quite normally. I'm like, no, come on, you've got to go for it. So in a group, if I or have, you know, when I've done it, I am instructing my group to be really making some difference there.
Holy is the Lord, holy is the Lord, holy is the Lord on high. I have seen the glory of the Lord. My eyes are open, my spirit soars.
And then we get to, you know, holy is the Lord on high. And it's almost like we've reached it, it's released. And then I have seen, in the new key, I have seen the glory of. Now we've got a pause on that, haven't we? On that glory of the Lord. And that is, you know, G for a soprano is a nice note. I think it's a nice note. If I was to ask my husband who plays the tenor horn, he'd go, "Oh, I like a G. I like playing a G." You know, it's over our passaggio note. So say for sopranos, mine is about an F. It can shuffle. You know, it's not that a soprano has to be an F. It could be an E flat. It could be an F sharp. Once I get to an F sharp, I know I'm in that. And I've worked really hard at sort of making sure I've got one voice, because you don't really want to have 3 voices. You don't want to have chest voice, middle voice, high voice, and it sounds like 3 different people. You want that to be all one voice. And so of is a bit of a weird vowel sound to sing the of the Lord. So you kind of have to use an open off sound. So I use quite a lot of phonetics. It's what we did in at college, especially when you're singing different French or German, you do a lot of phonetic translation of it just to make sure you were singing the right vowel sounds. And so I would write on my score like an open O sound in phonetics, because that's got to be of the Lord. So you're getting back to that vowel, and that F is just really coming right at the end. It's not really affecting the sound. And then kind of moving forward again, my eyes, it's a bit tricky on an F, my eyes. So you've got to sing the M, and it's the front consonant, my, and get back to that sort of R sound again. So you're, a lot of the time with upper registers, you're kind of blending the vowels a lot. So it's I is the vowel sound, but sometimes you kind of stick a bit of an R in there because it's going to help sound, and it's going to help resonate and spin the note. So you kind of have to blend it. And so it's kind of working through then, you know, it's nice, the obligato that we've got in that line for top soprano. If you've got a couple of sopranos or just one soprano, it's on an R. So that should be nice.
Yeah.
That is really should be just sitting on top. You don't want it sharp,
floating.
you know, it's floating. Yeah. But when we float, we've got to have that support, haven't we? That's the main thing. It's got to be supported. You've got to have that there. I couldn't sing that without it being supported. It was so horrible. And underneath, we're back to that choral singing. And that's really, I always think that chorus is so passionate. It's having that support there. It's listening, it's intonation again. It's practicing vowels first before sticking those consonants on, particularly in that third verse and the last verse. And that's kind of throughout. I think sometimes I've noticed, if you look at bar 42, so sort of 44, you know, when we've got the little top obligato, that can be tricky for sopranos. Singing at a G up there can be tricky. I would really be singing the vowels more than I'd be singing any consonants. And so
everyone else has that covered for you, so you can almost just do an R over the top.
Don't worry about it. Because if you just sing those top vowels, and I'm talking about as a soprano now, you don't want to think, oh my goodness, I've got to get the consonants in, and that then sacrifice being flat or sharp. And I think there, like you say, it's covered in all the parts underneath. I mean, you know, what are we in there? 5 parts or something? So it's covered. The words are covered. You're covered by the second sopranos. They can be really making sure those consonants are clear. But you can be sitting on the top because you kind of bet your bottom dollar if it's sharp or flat, that's what people will hear. You know, if you're sharp or flat up there, that's what people remember.
That'll be the lasting impression of the song.
It'll be the lasting impression of the beautiful song you've just sung. And it can affect that whole intonation if you're going to have, you know, particularly sharp or flat top. So my top tip for any soprano singing up there is don't worry about those consonants. I might get told off for doing that, but I kind of do it. So I'm going to go with it. That's my advice. And kind of moving again, those top notes right at the end. It's on our men, so it's a nice open. But you know, even on men, just get back to that air sound and stick the N in, you know, at the end. Always be using those vowels. I can't kind of stress that enough. It's so key. Vowels and, you know, support is always going to be your best friend as a singer. Wasn't using my diaphragm, I wouldn't get through. I couldn't. My voice would be breathy, tired. I'd have no stamina. You know, it's so important to be remembering that. Pick people's brains. You know, I know, Karl, you and I have had lots of conversations, haven't we, about singing and stuff. You know, pick people's brains. There's some great people to ask, and they, you know, we're doing this, I think my premise is that, you know, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I've got a bit of an OCD, I'll admit it. I think all performers are slightly a bit right-brained like that. But when I think about it as my ministry, I have to do it as best I can. If we know that we've sung our best for God and we've praised him in the way we can really know that, anything under that, I remember hearing Ron's conversation. He was talking about excellence in music, and I agree with that. I don't know if I use the word excellence. I probably think it can be quite scary to say that to young people. Yeah. Excellent, you know. But I think if we can give of our best, if we can really, and that does mean going and asking questions, you know, improving ourselves.
Thank you for kind of taking us through that song. It's really, really interesting to hear your perspective on it, and just to hear how you would approach the song, and yeah, giving fresh ideas and different ways of thinking when we're singing, because a lot of the time we might approach a song in a songster rehearsal or sing company practice and not really think much into it and just sing, and, you know, not really connect everything and, you know, really work at it and think about it. So it's really encouraging to be able to hear you just give advice and tips and how, and like I said, a perspective of how you'd approach it. So that's really invaluable. So thank you so much.
I'm sure I've forgotten loads of stuff. It's wonderful. So thank you very much for inviting me.